Did you seriously just introduce me as Emma? You know, the computer girl. My voice cracked as I stared at my sister Victoria across the crowded engagement party. The Grand Ballroom at Riverside Country Club buzzed with 250 guests, all here to celebrate Vicky's upcoming wedding to her investment banker fiancé. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over tables draped in ivory silk, and the air hummed with congratulations and champagne toasts. But standing there in my simple black dress watching my sister bask in the spotlight while our mother Patricia guided yet another family friend away from me with an apologetic smile, I felt completely invisible. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Victoria's laugh tinkled like wind chimes as she adjusted her designer cocktail dress, the kind that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Oh, come on, Em, don't be so dramatic. I was just explaining what you do for work. She gestured vaguely with her champagne flute, as if my entire career could be summarized with a wave of her manicured hand. Besides, most of these people wouldn't understand all that technical stuff anyway. I watched as Uncle Michael approached our conversation circle, his face already lighting up with the kind of enthusiasm reserved for Victoria. "There's our golden girl," he boomed, pulling Vicky into a bear hug while I stood 3 feet away, somehow managing to become part of the wallpaper. Senior account manager at Morrison Marketing, engaged to that handsome Bradley fellow, and now this gorgeous party. Your parents must be so proud. Patricia materialized beside us, her face glowing with maternal pride as she straightened an already perfect flower arrangement on the nearby cocktail table. "Oh, we absolutely are. Victoria has always been such a natural with people. She just has this way of lighting up every room she enters." Her eyes swept past me like I was part of the furniture. "She gets it from her father's side of the family, all those natural leadership genes." The pattern had been the same my entire life, but somehow I'd convinced myself things might be different at Victoria's engagement party. Maybe, just maybe, my family would finally see me as more than Emma the quiet one, Emma the computer girl, Emma who worked from home and didn't quite fit into their world of networking events and country club memberships. I had arrived tonight genuinely excited to celebrate my sister's happiness, wearing my nicest dress and even getting my hair professionally styled for the occasion. But within the first hour I realized nothing had changed. The invisible treatment started the moment I walked into the venue. While Victoria held court near the entrance, greeting guests with air kisses and delighted squeals, I found myself relegated to helping carry gift bags and directing people to the coat check. When family friends asked about me, Patricia would smile apologetically and quickly redirect the conversation back to Victoria's achievements. "Oh, Emma's doing her computer thing, but let me tell you about Vicky's latest campaign success at Morrison Marketing. It wasn't malicious, exactly. My family didn't actively try to hurt me. They simply existed in a world where Victoria's accomplishments made perfect sense to them, while mine remained as foreign as speaking a different language." Victoria worked in marketing, dealt with clients, attended networking mixers, and brought home stories they could understand and share at their own social gatherings. She dated men who wore suits and worked in finance, attended charity galas, and fit seamlessly into the country club lifestyle they'd worked decades to achieve. I, on the other hand, had chosen a path that might as well have been on another planet. While Victoria was perfecting her pitch presentations, I was learning to code. While she was building relationships with potential clients over expensive lunches, I was troubleshooting server issues at 2 in the morning. While she climbed the traditional corporate ladder, I had ventured into the uncertain world of technology startups and remote work. To my family, my career choice seemed like an extended hobby rather than a serious profession. The dismissal wasn't limited to my work life. Everything about me seemed to generate polite disinterest from my relatives. My apartment in Santa Monica was too small and too far from family. My preference for quiet evenings over loud social events was antisocial. My last relationship had ended partly because my ex-boyfriend felt embarrassed by my family's lukewarm reception of him at gatherings. Even my college choice had been met with subtle disapproval when I'd chosen computer science over Victoria's business marketing degree. Tonight's engagement party represented the culmination of everything my family valued and celebrated. Victoria had managed to land not just a successful career but also a picture-perfect romance with Bradley Morrison, whose family owned half the commercial real estate in Riverside County. The engagement ring on her finger probably cost more than I'd made in my first 2 years out of college. The party itself was a testament to the kind of life my parents had always dreamed their daughters would achieve, complete with engraved invitations, a live jazz quartet, and enough flowers to stock a small garden center. As the evening progressed, I found myself drifting from conversation to conversation, always on the periphery, always introduced as an afterthought. Aunt Jennifer would greet Victoria with genuine excitement about wedding planning details, then turn to me with a polite but vacant smile. "And how are you doing, dear?" she'd ask, but her attention would already be shifting back to Victoria before I could formulate a meaningful response. The breaking point came during the formal toasts. Richard stood at the front of the ballroom, champagne glass raised, his face beaming with paternal pride. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for joining us tonight to celebrate our daughter Victoria's engagement to Bradley. Those of you who know Vicky understand what a special young woman she is. From the time she was little, she's been a natural leader, someone who brings out the best in everyone around her." He continued for several minutes, detailing Victoria's childhood accomplishments, her academic achievements, her rapid rise at Morrison Marketing, and her natural ability to connect with people. The crowd listened attentively, murmuring approval and raising their glasses at appropriate moments. Victoria glowed under the attention, occasionally wiping away tears of joy as her father painted a picture of her as the perfect daughter who had exceeded every expectation. Then Richard's gaze swept the room and landed on me, standing near the back wall beside a towering floral arrangement. "And of course we're also proud of our Emma, who's doing well with her computer work." That was it. 30 seconds compared to Victoria's 5-minute tribute. The crowd politely applauded while I forced a smile and raised my own champagne glass, feeling smaller with each passing moment. Patricia followed with her own toast, focusing entirely on Victoria's grace, charm, and natural ability to make everyone feel welcome. She shared anecdotes about Victoria's high school student council presidency, her college sorority leadership roles, and her talent for organizing family gatherings. The subtext was clear: Victoria was the daughter they'd always envisioned, while I remained a pleasant but unremarkable addition to the family portrait. After the formal toasts concluded, I escaped to the venue's outdoor terrace, needing fresh air and a moment away from the suffocating atmosphere of forced celebration. The October evening was crisp, with a gentle breeze rustling through the oak trees surrounding the country club grounds. City lights twinkled in the distance, and I could hear the muffled sounds of laughter and music drifting through the ballroom's French doors. Standing there alone, I reflected on the years of feeling invisible within my own family. It hadn't always been intentional neglect, but the cumulative effect had shaped every family interaction. Christmas mornings were
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Victoria's gifts were presented with fanfare while mine were handed over with casual affection. Family dinners where conversations centered on Victoria's dating life, work achievements, and social calendar, while my updates were met with polite nods and quick subject changes. Graduation ceremonies where Victoria's business degree was celebrated with elaborate parties while my computer science accomplishment was acknowledged with a quiet dinner at a chain restaurant. The pattern extended beyond my immediate family to our entire extended network. Cousins, aunts, uncles, and family friends all seemed to orbit around Victoria's magnetic presence while I remained in the shadows. Even tonight, surrounded by 250 people celebrating my sister's happiness, I felt profoundly alone. What hurt most wasn't the lack of attention itself, but what it represented about my family's perception of value and success. Victoria's achievements were visible, social, and easily understood by their generation. She worked with people, attended events, and built relationships that fit neatly into their worldview of professional accomplishment. My work, despite being equally challenging and significantly more lucrative than anyone realized, remained abstract and incomprehensible to them. They had no idea that while Victoria was climbing the corporate ladder at Morrison Marketing, I had been building something far more substantial. They couldn't see past their preconceptions about computer work to understand that technology had become the foundation of virtually every successful business in the modern economy. They viewed my remote work arrangement as a lack of ambition rather than a strategic choice that allowed me to focus on results rather than office politics. As I stood on that terrace, watching the celebration continue without my participation, I made a decision that would change everything. I was finished trying to earn their recognition and approval. I was done attempting to translate my accomplishments into language they could understand and appreciate. If my family wanted to treat me as invisible, then invisible I would become. But someday, when the truth about my success finally emerged, they would realize exactly what they had overlooked all these years. The realization wasn't born from anger or resentment, but from a kind of exhausted acceptance. I had spent decades hoping that my next achievement, my next milestone, my next breakthrough would finally earn their genuine interest and respect. But tonight had crystallized an uncomfortable truth: my family's dismissal wasn't about my lack of accomplishments. It was about their inability to recognize value that didn't fit their predetermined definitions of success. Walking back into the ballroom, I observed the party with new eyes. Victoria continued to sparkle at the center of attention, graciously accepting congratulations and posing for countless photos. Patricia and Richard beamed with pride as they introduced their successful daughter to business associates and family friends. The entire evening was a carefully orchestrated celebration of everything my family believed represented achievement and happiness. And I realized that while they celebrated Victoria's engagement and career progress, none of them had any idea that the quiet daughter standing in the corner had built something that dwarfed every accomplishment being celebrated tonight. But that revelation would come later, when circumstances would force them to see me clearly for the first time in my life. The drive home from Victoria's engagement party felt like traveling through a tunnel of self-reflection. My small Honda Civic hummed along the familiar streets of Riverside, past the strip malls and chain restaurants that had formed the backdrop of my childhood. The contrast between the opulent country club ballroom and my modest apartment in Santa Monica had never felt more pronounced. As I navigated the late-night traffic, I couldn't shake the image of my family's faces during those toasts, their expressions ranging from glowing pride when speaking about Victoria to polite obligation when acknowledging my existence. The invisibility hadn't started tonight. It had been building for years, each family gathering adding another layer to my growing sense of displacement. I remembered my college graduation, where Victoria had somehow managed to steal the spotlight even though it was supposed to be my day. While I walked across the stage to receive my computer science degree, Victoria had chosen that exact weekend to announce her acceptance of a prestigious internship at Morrison Marketing. The celebration dinner that should have focused on my academic achievement instead became a strategy session about Victoria's career trajectory and networking opportunities. Even earlier memories carried the same pattern. High school science fair victories were overshadowed by Victoria's Homecoming Queen campaign. My acceptance into advanced programming courses was mentioned in passing, while family dinners centered on Victoria's latest drama club performance or student council initiative. It wasn't that my parents actively discouraged my interests, but they clearly didn't understand or value them the way they celebrated Victoria's more conventional achievements. The technological gap between generations played a significant role in this dynamic. My parents, both in their early 60s, had spent their careers running Collins Hardware and Garden Center, the small family business Richard had inherited from his father. They understood inventory management, customer service, and local community relationships. When Victoria chose marketing as her college major, it made perfect sense to them. Marketing involved talking to people, building relationships, and promoting products or services in ways they could easily comprehend. My choice to study computer science, however, might as well have been written in a foreign language. When I tried to explain programming concepts or discuss software development during family conversations, I could see their eyes glaze over within minutes. They would nod politely and make encouraging sounds, but their lack of genuine interest was obvious. To them, my work existed in some abstract digital realm that had little connection to the tangible world of business they understood. This disconnect became more pronounced as my career developed. While Victoria's job at Morrison Marketing provided her with stories about client meetings, advertising campaigns, and office dynamics that my family could easily follow and discuss, my work remained largely invisible to them. I spent my days solving complex technical problems, architecting software solutions, and building systems that powered other businesses, but none of this translated into dinner table conversation they could engage with meaningfully. The irony was that my computer work had become far more financially successful than anyone in my family realized, including Victoria's celebrated marketing career. But success in the technology sector doesn't always manifest in ways that traditional families recognize or celebrate. I didn't have a corner office with my name on the door, I didn't attend networking events or pose for company newsletter photos. My achievements were measured in code efficiency, user adoption rates, and revenue growth rather than the more visible markers my family associated with professional success. After that engagement party, I made a conscious decision to stop trying to bridge the gap between their understanding and my reality. If my family couldn't see past their preconceptions to appreciate what I had built, then I would simply stop attempting to translate my world into theirs. This decision brought both relief and sadness. Relief because I could finally stop the exhausting effort of seeking their approval for achievements they would never truly understand. Sadness because it meant accepting that my closest family members would remain strangers to the most important aspects of my life. The following months passed quietly. I continued developing TechFlow innovations while maintaining minimal contact with my family beyond obligatory holiday gatherings and birthday calls. Victoria's wedding planning consumed most of our parents' attention anyway, leaving me free to focus entirely on my business without the distraction of trying to earn their interest or recognition. During this period, my company experienced explosive growth. The logistics software platform I had developed was solving real problems for businesses across multiple industries. What had started as a solution for small e-commerce companies had evolved into enterprise-level software that major corporations were adopting to streamline their supply chain operations. The scalability and efficiency of the platform created a snowball effect where each successful implementation led to referrals and larger contracts. David Kim, my business partner and chief technology officer, had joined the company 2 years earlier when we were still operating out of my Santa Monica apartment. Unlike me, David came from a family that understood and celebrated technological innovation. His parents, both engineers who had emigrated from South Korea in the 1980s, recognized immediately that we were building something significant. They would ask detailed questions about our development process, celebrate our milestone achievements, and offer practical advice about scaling the business. The contrast between David's family support and my own family's indifference was stark. When we landed our first $1 million contract with Thomson Industries, David's parents insisted on taking us out for an elaborate celebration dinner. They understood that this wasn't just a business transaction but a validation of years of hard work and technical innovation. Meanwhile, when I mentioned the same achievement during a Sunday family dinner, my father nodded absently and asked if I thought Victoria's wedding flowers should be white roses or cream-colored peonies. As TechFlow Innovations grew from a 2-person startup to a legitimate company with real employees, office space and significant revenue, I began to appreciate how completely my family had misjudged both my potential and my achievements. They still introduced me as Emma, who does computer work from home, long after we had moved into a proper downtown Los Angeles office building and hired our first 20 employees. The transformation wasn't just professional but personal as well. Building a successful company from scratch had given me confidence I never possessed during those years of seeking my family's approval. I discovered that I was actually quite good at leadership, just not in the conventional way Victoria demonstrated at social gatherings. My style was quieter but equally effective. I motivated through competence rather than charisma, built loyalty through fairness rather than personality, and achieved results through strategic thinking rather than networking schmoozing. This growing self-assurance began affecting how I handled family interactions. Instead of feeling diminished by their dismissive comments, I started finding them almost amusing. When Uncle Michael would pat me on the head and ask if I was still playing around with those computers, I would smile and nod rather than attempting to explain that those computers were generating more revenue than his entire accounting firm. When Aunt Jennifer would suggest I should find a nice stable job like Victoria, I would agree that stability was indeed important while privately calculating that my company's monthly revenue exceeded Victoria's annual salary. The invisible treatment that had once caused me such pain began to feel like a protective shield. My family's inability to see my success meant I could continue building it without their interference, expectations, or attempts to claim credit for my achievements. Victoria's accomplishments required constant family involvement and discussion. Every promotion, every successful campaign, every professional milestone became a family celebration that demanded energy and attention from everyone. My success, however, existed in a parallel universe that my family couldn't access or complicate. They couldn't offer unwanted advice about decisions they didn't understand. They couldn't take credit for opportunities they hadn't provided. They couldn't create drama around achievements they didn't recognize. In a strange way, their dismissal had given me the freedom to succeed entirely on my own terms. This realization fundamentally changed my relationship with family gatherings. Instead of dreading them as exercises and feeling inadequate, I began attending with a kind of anthropological curiosity. I would watch my relatives navigate their social hierarchies, celebrate their conventional markers of success, and reinforce their shared values while remaining completely unaware that one of their own had transcended their entire framework of achievement. The Christmas gathering 6 months after Victoria's engagement party perfectly illustrated this dynamic. The extended family assembled at my parents' house for the traditional holiday dinner, complete with Patricia's famous prime rib and Richard's annual slideshow of family photos from the past year. Victoria dominated the conversation with wedding planning updates, honeymoon destination discussions, and stories about her recent promotion to senior account manager. Meanwhile, I sat quietly at the kids' table because all the adult spots were occupied by family members whose achievements my parents deemed more worthy of recognition. While Victoria described her latest marketing campaign for a local restaurant chain, I mentally calculated that my company's software was processing more transactions in a single day than that restaurant chain handled in an entire year. The disconnect reached almost surreal proportions when Patricia announced that she had been bragging to her book club friends about having both daughters doing so well in their careers. Victoria's success, she explained in detail to the assembled relatives, proved that the Collins family had raised ambitious, accomplished young women. My contribution to this family success story was acknowledged with a vague wave in my direction, and the comment that I was doing really well with her computer business too. At that moment, sitting at the children's table while my parents celebrated Victoria's conventional achievements, I realized that my family's inability to see me clearly had become my greatest competitive advantage. They couldn't interfere with something they couldn't understand. They couldn't complicate something they couldn't see. They couldn't diminish something they couldn't recognize. But this protective invisibility wouldn't last forever. Eventually, circumstances would force them to confront the reality of what I had built while they were looking the other way. When that moment arrived, the family dynamics that had seemed so firmly established would shift in ways none of us could have anticipated. The opportunity for this revelation came sooner than I expected, though not in the way I had imagined. Victoria's wedding planning hit a significant obstacle when the venue they had booked for the reception suddenly canceled their contract. The historic mansion they had chosen for their June wedding was being sold, and the new owners didn't want to honor existing event bookings. Patricia called me in a panic on a Tuesday afternoon, her voice strained with the kind of stress that accompanies wedding planning disasters. "Emma, honey, I know you're busy with work, but we have a family emergency. Victoria's reception venue just canceled, and we can't find anywhere else that can accommodate 200 guests on such short notice. Everything decent is already booked for June." I listened patiently while she explained the crisis, already formulating solutions they hadn't considered. My experience scaling TechFlow innovations had taught me that most problems had creative solutions if you were willing to think beyond conventional approaches and had sufficient resources to implement alternatives. "What if you don't need a traditional venue?" I asked quietly. "What do you mean?" Patricia sounded confused by the suggestion. "What if you could create exactly the wedding Victoria wants, customized to her preferences, without being limited by what existing venues offer?" The silence on the other end of the line stretched long enough that I wondered if we had been disconnected. Finally, Patricia spoke, her voice uncertain. Emma, what are you talking about? We need a place that can handle catering, flowers, seating, music, parking, all of that. We can't just throw together some backyard party. What my mother didn't realize was that her computer girl daughter had spent the last 3 years attending high-level business events, industry conferences, and investor meetings that made Victoria's Country Club engagement party look like a casual gathering. I had connections with event planners who specialized in corporate functions for Fortune 500 companies. I knew vendors who could transform empty spaces into spectacular venues overnight. Most importantly, I had the financial resources to make seemingly impossible things happen quickly. Mom, I said carefully, what if I told you I could arrange something better than any traditional venue Victoria could book? What if I could create her perfect wedding reception exactly as she's always dreamed it? Another long pause. Then Patricia laughed, not unkindly but with the kind of gentle dismissal I had grown accustomed to over the years. Sweetheart, that's very sweet of you to offer, but this isn't something we can handle with computer skills. We need real event planning experience, professional vendors, the kind of connections that take years to develop. The conversation ended with Patricia promising to keep looking for available venues while politely declining my offer to help. As I hung up the phone, I realized that my family's wedding crisis had just provided the perfect opportunity to demonstrate exactly what their computer girl daughter had become capable of accomplishing. But this time, instead of trying to convince them with words they wouldn't understand or explanations they wouldn't value, I would simply show them. The revelation would come through actions rather than arguments, through results rather than rhetoric. Victoria's wedding would become the moment when my family's perception of me would change forever, though not in any way they could currently imagine. The irony was perfect. They were rejecting help from someone who could easily solve their problem because they couldn't see past their preconceptions about my capabilities. But their dismissal had just given me the opportunity to orchestrate something that would make it impossible for them to remain blind to my success any longer. What they didn't know was that their invisible daughter was about to become impossible to ignore. The morning after Patricia's panicked phone call about Victoria's wedding venue crisis, I sat in my downtown Los Angeles office watching the sunrise paint the city skyline in shades of gold and amber. The TechFlow Innovations headquarters occupied 3 floors of a sleek glass building, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views that never failed to remind me how far I had traveled from my family's world of small-town expectations. David Kim knocked on my open office door carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing the expression he reserved for our most important strategic discussions. As my business partner and closest friend, David had witnessed countless conversations where my family's dismissiveness left me frustrated and hurt. He understood better than anyone how their inability to see my achievements had shaped both my determination to succeed and my reluctance to share that success with them. "I heard your mom's voice through your office door yesterday," he said, settling into the chair across from my desk. "Sounded like she was pretty stressed about something." I explained Victoria's wedding venue disaster and Patricia's polite rejection of my offer to help. David listened without interruption, occasionally raising his eyebrows at particularly telling details about my family's assumptions regarding my capabilities. When I finished describing the conversation, he leaned back in his chair and shook his head with the kind of disbelief that came from understanding exactly what my family was overlooking. "Emma," he said slowly, "do you realize what you could actually do for Victoria's wedding if you wanted to?" The question hung in the air between us. David wasn't just talking about arranging a venue or hiring caterers. He was referring to the network of high-level connections we had built over the past 3 years as TechFlow Innovations had grown from a startup to a major player in the enterprise software market. Our client list included Fortune 500 companies. Our investor meetings brought us into contact with some of the most successful business leaders in California, and our company events regularly attracted industry executives who controlled budgets larger than most small cities. I could probably arrange something fairly impressive, I admitted, though the understatement made us both smile. David pulled out his phone and started scrolling through his contacts. "Remember the Thompson Industries annual gala we attended last month? The one at the Beverly Hills Hotel where they completely transformed the ballroom and gardens?" I nodded. Lisa Thompson, CEO of Thompson Industries and one of our largest clients, had hosted an event that redefined elegant sophistication. The company had flown in flowers from Ecuador, hired a renowned chef who normally cooked for celebrities, and created an atmosphere that made every guest feel like they were attending the social event of the year. Lisa mentioned she uses the same event planning team for all her major functions. David continued, corporate events, charity galas, private celebrations. The woman she works with, Monica Reeves, apparently has connections throughout Southern California's luxury event industry. As David spoke, I began to visualize what would be possible if I really wanted to show my family what their computer girl daughter had become capable of accomplishing. It wouldn't just be about arranging a successful wedding reception, it would be about creating something so spectacular, so obviously expensive and well-connected, that even my parents couldn't dismiss it as some kind of lucky accident or minor achievement. The idea that began forming in my mind wasn't driven by revenge or a desire to embarrass my family. Instead, it represented something far more significant, an opportunity to demonstrate my true capabilities in a language they couldn't ignore or misinterpret. For years, I had tried to explain my success using technical terms and industry jargon that meant nothing to them. But a wedding reception that surpassed their wildest expectations would communicate everything they needed to understand about my professional achievements and personal resources. David, I said quietly, what if we didn't just help with Victoria's wedding? What if we made it absolutely unforgettable? His eyes lit up with the kind of enthusiasm he usually reserved for solving complex technical challenges. You mean pull out all the stops, use every connection we've got? Over the next 2 hours, we outlined a plan that would transform Victoria's wedding crisis into an opportunity for me to reveal the full scope of what I had built while my family wasn't paying attention. The strategy wasn't complicated, but its execution would require resources and connections that most people couldn't access, even with months of planning and unlimited budgets. First, I would need to create a venue that didn't currently exist. Rather than trying to find an available location that met Victoria's requirements, we would transform a space into exactly what she had always dreamed of for her perfect wedding. David suggested the rooftop gardens at the Century Plaza Hotel, which could accommodate large events but weren't typically used for weddings. With the right planning and substantial financial investment, we could create an outdoor celebration that would surpass any traditional ballroom or historic mansion. Second, we would need to assemble a team of vendors who normally worked with corporate clients and celebrity events rather than typical wedding planners. This meant accessing a network of professionals who were accustomed to creating spectacular results on tight timelines for clients who demanded perfection and had the resources to achieve it. Finally, and most importantly, the entire event would need to appear effortless. My family couldn't be allowed to see the complexity, expense, or high-level connections required to orchestrate such an elaborate celebration. From their perspective, their computer girl daughter would simply handle some wedding planning logistics, the same way they might ask me to help set up folding chairs or arrange transportation. The first call I made was to Lisa Thompson. As CEO of Thompson Industries and one of TechFlow's most important clients, Lisa had become both a business partner and personal mentor over the past 2 years. She understood the technology sector, appreciated innovative thinking, and had often commented that my strategic approach to business development reminded her of her own entrepreneurial journey. Emma, Lisa's voice carried the warmth of genuine friendship when she answered her direct line. How are things at TechFlow? I heard through the grapevine that you landed the Martinez Corporation contract. That's huge. After exchanging pleasantries about business, I explained my family situation with the kind of honesty that our professional relationship had made possible. Lisa listened without judgment as I described years of feeling invisible and dismissed, culminating in my family's current wedding crisis and their assumption that I couldn't provide meaningful assistance. So let me understand this correctly, Lisa said when I finished explaining. Your family has no idea that TechFlow Innovations generates more revenue than most mid-sized corporations. They know I run a computer business, but they think it's something like freelance web design, or maybe selling electronics online. Lisa's laughter carried a note of disbelief. Emma, your company processes logistics for half the Fortune 1000. You employ 300 people. You're about to close a Series C funding round that will value TechFlow at over $200 million. Hearing my achievements summarized by someone who understood their significance reminded me how completely my family had misjudged my professional trajectory. To Lisa and other business leaders in my network, I was a successful entrepreneur who had built something impressive and valuable. To my parents, I remained their daughter who played around with computers and worked from home because I couldn't handle a traditional office environment. I have an idea, Lisa continued, her voice taking on the strategic tone she used during business planning discussions. What if Monica Reeves and I helped you create something that would be impossible for your family to misunderstand or dismiss? Monica Reeves, it turned out, was more than just Lisa's preferred event planner. She was a former hospitality executive who had launched her own luxury event company after years of managing high-profile functions for major corporations and celebrity clients. Her typical projects included product launches for tech companies, charity galas for nonprofit organizations, and private celebrations for individuals whose names appeared regularly in business magazines and society pages. When I called Monica that afternoon, she was immediately intrigued by the challenge of creating an exceptional wedding reception on short notice. But when I explained my family dynamics and the underlying purpose of the event, her interest transformed into genuine enthusiasm. Emma, Monica said, I've been in this business for 15 years, and I can tell you that the most satisfying events are the ones where we get to surprise people who have underestimated what's possible. If you're willing to invest in making this spectacular, I can create something your family will never forget. The planning process that followed was unlike anything I had ever experienced. Monica didn't just coordinate vendors and logistics, she orchestrated an elaborate production that would transform Victoria's wedding reception into a showcase of connections, resources, and attention to detail that most people only encountered at corporate events or celebrity functions. The Century Plaza Hotel rooftop required extensive modifications to accommodate Monica's vision. Temporary structures would house a full catering kitchen staffed by chefs from Beverly Hills' most exclusive restaurants. Professional lighting designers would create an ambiance that transformed the outdoor space into something resembling a fairy tale setting. A renowned florist, who normally worked with movie studios, would design arrangements that incorporated rare blooms flown in from specialty growers around the world. Every detail was planned to demonstrate sophistication and resources that extended far beyond typical wedding planning. The music would be provided by a jazz ensemble that regularly performed at high-end corporate events and private parties for entertainment industry executives. The photographer was the same professional who documented product launches and business conferences for Fortune 500 companies. Even the transportation would be handled by a service that normally provided luxury vehicles for visiting executives and celebrity clients. As the planning progressed, I began to appreciate how completely this event would shatter my family's preconceptions about my capabilities and resources. They expected me to help with basic logistics, perhaps making phone calls to local vendors or researching available venues online. Instead, I was orchestrating a celebration that would rival the most elaborate corporate galas or society events they had ever attended. The most telling moment came when Monica sent me the preliminary budget for the reception. The total cost exceeded what most people spent on their entire weddings, including the ceremony, reception, flowers, photography, and honeymoon combined. It represented a financial investment that would be impossible to explain away as lucky timing or helpful connections. More importantly, the budget reflected the kind of resources that successful business executives had access to, not the modest earnings my family associated with computer work. When Patricia eventually learned what the reception had cost, she would understand immediately that her assumptions about my career and financial situation had been completely incorrect. But the revelation wouldn't come through direct explanation or awkward conversation. Instead, it would unfold naturally as my family experienced firsthand the kind of event that money, connections, and business success could create. They would see their computer girl daughter demonstrate capabilities they hadn't imagined she possessed, using resources they hadn't realized she had access to. The planning phase was intensely satisfying in ways I hadn't anticipated. For years I had watched my family celebrate Victoria's conventional achievements while dismissing my technological success as something abstract and unimportant. Now I was preparing to demonstrate that my supposedly limited capabilities could create something far more impressive than anything Victoria had ever accomplished through her traditional career path. But the most meaningful aspect of the project wasn't the opportunity to prove myself to my skeptical relatives. Instead, it was the realization that I had built something substantial enough to make this level of generosity possible. The wedding reception I was planning for Victoria would cost more than most people's annual salaries, and I could afford it without compromising TechFlow Innovations' growth plans or my personal financial security. This wasn't just about showing off or seeking delayed recognition from family members who had overlooked my achievements. It was about demonstrating to myself that the years of feeling invisible and undervalued had actually been productive. While my family hadn't been paying attention, I had grown into someone capable of transforming problems into opportunities and creating experiences that exceeded everyone's expectations. Victoria's wedding would mark the end of my invisibility, but not in the way any of us anticipated. 3 days after my conversation with Monica Reeves, I called Patricia back with what appeared to be a simple offer. The strategy David and I had developed required my family to believe they were accepting modest assistance with wedding logistics rather than recognizing that I was orchestrating an elaborate demonstration of capabilities they had never imagined I possessed. "Mom," I said when Patricia answered her phone, sounding harried and exhausted from days of frantically searching for alternative venues, "I've been thinking about Victoria's situation, and I might have found a solution." The relief in her voice was immediate and heartfelt. "Oh, Emma, thank goodness, we've called every venue within 50 miles, and everything is either booked or completely wrong for what Victoria wants. I was starting to think we might have to postpone the wedding until fall." I let her describe a few more details about their unsuccessful venue search before presenting my carefully crafted proposal. "I have a contact through work who might be able to help. There's this event space that could be available, but it would require some coordination and planning. I'd be happy to handle the details if Victoria is interested." The phrase "contact through work" was technically accurate, though it dramatically understated my relationship with Lisa Thompson and the network of luxury event professionals she had connected me with. Similarly, describing the Century Plaza rooftop as this event space failed to convey the elaborate transformation Monica was planning to create Victoria's dream reception. Patricia's enthusiasm was touching in its genuine gratitude. "Emma, sweetie, that would be wonderful. Are you sure it wouldn't be too much trouble? I know you're busy with your computer work." Over the following weeks, I managed the wedding planning process with the same strategic approach I used for complex business projects at TechFlow Innovations. Monica Reeves handled all vendor coordination and logistics, while I served as the primary point of contact with my family. This arrangement allowed me to control the information flow and ensure that my parents remained unaware of the scale and sophistication of what we were creating. The deception wasn't malicious, but it was deliberate. Every conversation with Patricia focused on practical details that sounded like typical wedding planning logistics. I would mention that the florist confirmed availability, without explaining that we were working with the same designer who created arrangements for movie premieres and celebrity galas. I would update her on menu planning progress without revealing that we had hired chefs who normally catered corporate events for Fortune 500 executives. Victoria's involvement in the planning process was limited to selecting preferences and making decisions about personal touches like color schemes and music selections. She appreciated my help but clearly viewed it as a sister stepping in to handle basic coordination tasks. During our conversations, she would thank me for dealing with all the boring vendor stuff so she could focus on more important aspects of wedding preparation. The irony of Victoria's attitude wasn't lost on me. She had always been the family member who effortlessly commanded attention and respect, while I remained invisible and undervalued. Now she was unconsciously dismissing the most elaborate event planning project of her life as boring vendor stuff that her computer-savvy sister could handle as a favor. Meanwhile, Monica's team was orchestrating a transformation that would create something unprecedented in our family's experience. The Century Plaza rooftop was being converted into a garden paradise that incorporated design elements from the world's most exclusive venues. Temporary structures were being installed to house professional-grade kitchen facilities and climate-controlled storage for thousands of imported flowers. The guest experience was being designed to surpass typical wedding receptions in every measurable way. Instead of standard wedding photography, we arranged for a team that included the same professionals who documented high-profile business events and celebrity functions. Rather than hiring a local DJ or generic wedding band, we booked the jazz ensemble that regularly performed at exclusive corporate galas and private parties for entertainment industry executives. Even the transportation logistics reflected resources that extended far beyond typical wedding planning. Monica arranged for luxury vehicle service that normally provided transportation for visiting business executives and celebrity clients. The same company that handled airport transfers and event transportation for major corporations would ensure that every wedding guest experienced the kind of service typically reserved for VIP business functions. As the wedding date approached, I found myself simultaneously excited and apprehensive about my family's reaction to what we had created. The event would demonstrate capabilities and resources that contradicted everything they believed about my professional success and personal circumstances. More importantly, it would force them to confront their assumptions about my value and importance within our family dynamic. The most challenging aspect of the planning process was maintaining the facade of modest assistance while coordinating details that required significant financial investment and high-level business connections. When Patricia asked about costs, I would provide vague reassurances that everything was being handled without explaining that the total budget exceeded what most people spent on luxury cars. This financial aspect of the project represented more than just generous gift-giving. It demonstrated that my supposedly limited computer work had generated the kind of success that made such elaborate generosity possible. When my family eventually learned what the reception had cost, they would understand immediately that their assumptions about my career trajectory and earning potential had been fundamentally incorrect. But the revelation wouldn't come through awkward conversations about money or business achievements. Instead, it would unfold naturally as they experience firsthand the kind of event that successful entrepreneurs could create when they decided to demonstrate their capabilities without restraint. The week before Victoria's wedding, David, Kim, and I conducted our final review of the reception plans with Monica and her team. The logistics coordination required for the event rivaled anything we had managed for TechFlow Innovation's largest corporate clients. Every detail had been planned to ensure flawless execution while simultaneously demonstrating the kind of resources and connections that most families never encountered. "Emma," Monica said as we concluded our planning session, "I want you to understand what you've created here. This reception will be more elaborate and sophisticated than most corporate galas I manage for Fortune 500 companies. Your family is going to experience something that most people only see in movies or magazine spreads." The comment crystallized something I had been thinking about throughout the planning process. This wasn't just about proving myself to family members who had underestimated my achievements. It was about demonstrating that the invisible daughter they had overlooked had grown into someone capable of creating experiences that exceeded their wildest expectations. More significantly, the wedding reception would mark the end of my willingness to remain invisible within my family. For years I had accepted their dismissiveness and worked around their inability to recognize my value. But after Victoria's wedding, that dynamic would be impossible to maintain. They would have to acknowledge what I had accomplished, even if they didn't fully understand how I had achieved it. The morning of Victoria's wedding dawned clear and warm, with the kind of perfect weather that Los Angeles produces for special occasions. I spent the early hours at TechFlow's offices, handling last-minute business tasks before shifting my attention entirely to the evening's celebration. David had volunteered to oversee any urgent company matters so I could focus completely on ensuring Victoria's reception exceeded everyone's expectations. The ceremony itself took place at the small church where our family had attended services throughout my childhood. Victoria looked radiant in her designer wedding gown, and Bradley appeared appropriately nervous and excited as he waited for his bride at the altar. The service was traditional and heartfelt, with Patricia dabbing at tears of joy and Richard beaming with paternal pride. During the ceremony, I found myself reflecting on how completely this day would change my relationship with my family. They currently saw me as the helpful sister who had managed to coordinate a nice reception venue on short notice. By the end of the evening, they would understand that their computer girl daughter possessed capabilities and resources they had never imagined. As the ceremony concluded and guests began making their way to cars for the drive to the reception venue, I experienced a moment of genuine nervousness about what the next few hours would reveal. For years I had dreamed of an opportunity to show my family what I had accomplished while they weren't paying attention. Now that moment had arrived, and I realized that success would fundamentally alter our family dynamics in ways that couldn't be undone. The drive from the church to the Century Plaza Hotel took 20 minutes through afternoon Los Angeles traffic. Most of the wedding guests had no idea what awaited them at the reception venue. They expected a nice party in a hotel ballroom or conference room, perhaps with good food and dancing, but nothing that would distinguish Victoria's wedding from countless other celebrations they had attended over the years. What they were about to experience would challenge those expectations in ways that would leave them questioning everything they thought they understood about the quiet Collins daughter who did computer work and rarely drew attention to herself at family gatherings. As I pulled into the hotel's valet parking area, I could see Monica's team making final preparations for the evening's grand revelation. The next few hours would determine whether years of feeling invisible had been worth the satisfaction of finally being impossible to ignore. The transformation was about to begin, and my family would never see me the same way again. The elevator ride to the Century Plaza rooftop felt like ascending toward a moment that would redefine everything my family understood about me. Through the glass walls, I could see Patricia adjusting Victoria's wedding dress train while Richard straightened his tie, both of them chatting excitedly about the reception they expected to find. Uncle Michael and Aunt Jennifer stood nearby with several other relatives, all anticipating a pleasant evening of dinner and dancing in what they assumed would be a nice hotel conference room. As the elevator doors opened onto the rooftop level, the first thing that struck everyone was the wall of fragrant air that greeted us. Thousands of white roses, peonies, and exotic orchids had been arranged to create the impression of walking into an enchanted garden. The scent was intoxicating, rich and layered in ways that only occurred when master florists worked with unlimited budgets and access to the world's finest flowers. But the floral arrangements were just the beginning. Monica's team had transformed the Century Plaza rooftop into something that looked like it belonged in a fairy tale or luxury lifestyle magazine. String lights wove through temporary trellises covered in cascading greenery, while elegant chandeliers hung from structures that hadn't existed 24 hours earlier. The entire space glowed with warm golden light that made every guest look like they were posed for a professional photograph. The morning after my conversation with Monica Reeves, I woke up with the kind of clarity that comes from finally having a plan that feels both ambitious and achievable. For the first time in years, I had an opportunity to demonstrate my true capabilities to my family in a language they couldn't misinterpret or dismiss. Victoria's wedding crisis had inadvertently created the perfect stage for revealing what their invisible daughter had actually accomplished while they weren't paying attention. I arrived at TechFlow Innovations that morning energized by possibilities I hadn't allowed myself to consider before. The office buzzed with its usual productive energy as my team worked on projects that affected businesses across multiple industries. Watching my employees collaborate on complex technical solutions reminded me of the distance I had traveled from the young woman who once desperately sought her family's approval for achievements they couldn't understand. David Kim found me in my office an hour later, carrying coffee and wearing the expression he reserved for our most important strategic discussions. Over the past 3 years, David had become more than just my business partner. He was the closest thing I had to family within the professional world I had built. Unlike my blood relatives, David understood exactly what TechFlow represented in terms of innovation, market impact, and financial success. "I've been thinking about your family situation all night," he said, settling into the chair across from my desk. The more I consider what you could actually do for Victoria's wedding, the more I realize this is about much more than helping with event planning. David was absolutely right. The wedding reception I was contemplating would serve multiple purposes beyond simply solving my sister's venue crisis. Most importantly, it would demonstrate capabilities and resources that would be impossible for my family to explain away or minimize. They had spent years treating me as the family member whose achievements didn't quite measure up to conventional markers of success. But arranging an extraordinary wedding celebration would require exactly the kind of high-level business connections and substantial financial resources that proved their assumptions had been completely wrong. The plan we developed over the following hours was elegant in its simplicity. I would approach my family with what appeared to be modest assistance finding an alternative venue and coordinating basic wedding logistics. Meanwhile, I would actually orchestrate one of the most elaborate celebrations anyone in our extended family had ever experienced. The contrast between their expectations and the reality of what I could deliver would make my success impossible to overlook or misunderstand. The first challenge was accessing the right network of vendors and service providers. Traditional wedding planners, no matter how skilled or experienced, operated within a different sphere than the luxury event professionals who created celebrations for major corporations and high-net-worth individuals. What I needed was access to the same team that might handle a Fortune 500 product launch or a celebrity charity gala. This requirement highlighted one of the most significant advantages of TechFlow's success that my family had never understood. Building a major technology company had connected me with business leaders, investors, and industry executives who moved in circles far removed from the small-town social networks my parents navigated. These relationships provided access to resources and services that most families couldn't imagine, let alone afford. Lisa Thompson proved to be the perfect connection for launching this project. As CEO of Thompson Industries and one of TechFlow's most important clients, Lisa had experience with the kind of high-end event planning that would be necessary to create something truly spectacular for Victoria. More importantly, she understood the business world well enough to appreciate why this demonstration of capabilities would be meaningful for my family relationships. When I called Lisa to explain the situation, her response was immediate and enthusiastic. "Emma, I love this idea. Your family has no concept of what you've built, do they?" She paused thoughtfully. "You know, the event planner I use for all my major corporate functions would be perfect for this project. Monica Reeves doesn't just coordinate parties, she creates experiences that people remember for years." Monica Reeves turned out to be exactly what the project required. During our initial conversation, she demonstrated the kind of strategic thinking and attention to detail that separated luxury event planning from traditional wedding coordination. More importantly, she understood immediately that this wasn't simply about creating a beautiful reception. It was about orchestrating a revelation that would change family dynamics permanently. "Let me understand your objectives," Monica said during our first meeting at her Beverly Hills office. "You want to create something spectacular enough to demonstrate capabilities your family hasn't recognized, but subtle enough that they don't realize the full scope of what you're doing until the event actually happens." The precision of her summary impressed me. Monica clearly understood that the project's success would depend on managing both the event logistics and the information flow to my family. They needed to experience something extraordinary while remaining unaware of the resources and connections required to make it possible. Over the following days, Monica and I developed a comprehensive plan that would transform Victoria's wedding reception into a showcase of everything my family had failed to appreciate about my professional achievements. The venue selection alone would demonstrate access to resources that extended far beyond typical wedding planning. Instead of booking an available ballroom or reception hall, we would create a custom event space that didn't currently exist. The Century Plaza Hotel rooftop offered the perfect canvas for this transformation. The space could accommodate large events but wasn't typically configured for weddings, which meant extensive modifications would be required to create the garden paradise Monica envisioned. Temporary structures would house professional-grade kitchen facilities and climate-controlled storage areas. Professional lighting designers would install systems that could transform the outdoor space into something resembling a movie set. But the venue was only the beginning. Monica's plan called for vendor partnerships that would elevate every aspect of the reception beyond typical wedding standards. The catering would be handled by chefs who normally worked with entertainment industry events and corporate galas. The floral arrangements would incorporate rare blooms that required special sourcing and transportation. Even the music would be provided by performers who regularly entertained at exclusive business functions and private celebrations for high-profile clients. As Monica outlined these details, I began to understand the full scope of what we were creating. This wouldn't just be an impressive wedding reception, it would be an event that rivaled the most elaborate corporate celebrations and society galas that most people only read about in magazines. The level of sophistication and expense would be impossible for my family to attribute to luck or helpful connections. The financial investment required for Monica's vision was substantial enough to prove a point that words had never been able to communicate effectively. When my parents eventually learned what the reception had cost, they would understand immediately that their assumptions about my earning capacity and professional success had been fundamentally incorrect. The budget represented the kind of discretionary spending that only became possible after achieving significant business success. But the most satisfying aspect of the project wasn't the opportunity to demonstrate wealth or professional connections. Instead, it was the chance to show my family that the daughter they had dismissed as lacking leadership potential could orchestrate something that exceeded their wildest expectations. For years they had celebrated Victoria's conventional achievements while treating my technological innovation as an amusing hobby. Now they would experience firsthand what someone with real resources and business acumen could accomplish when properly motivated. The planning process required the same strategic thinking and project management skills I used for TechFlow's most complex client implementations. Every detail needed to be coordinated precisely to ensure flawless execution while maintaining the illusion that this was simply helpful sister managing basic wedding logistics. Monica's team would handle all vendor relationships and on-site coordination, while I served as the primary point of contact with my family. This arrangement allowed me to control the information flow carefully. Every conversation with Patricia focused on reassuring updates about venue coordination and vendor confirmations without revealing the scale and sophistication of what we were actually creating. When she asked about costs, I provided vague assurances that everything was being handled appropriately without explaining that we were spending more on flowers alone than most families budgeted for their entire weddings. The deception wasn't intended to be malicious, but it was absolutely deliberate. My family needed to experience the results of my success without being prepared for what those results would actually look like. If they understood in advance what I was capable of arranging, the impact would be diminished. The revelation needed to come through direct experience rather than advance explanation. Meanwhile, Victoria remained focused on traditional wedding preparation activities like dress fittings and honeymoon planning. She appreciated my assistance with reception logistics but clearly viewed it as the kind of practical coordination that her technically minded sister could handle while she dealt with more important aspects of wedding planning. The irony of her attitude wasn't lost on me. She was unconsciously dismissing the most elaborate event of her life as routine task management. As the planning progressed, I found myself anticipating my family's reaction to what we were creating with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. This event would force them to confront assumptions they had held for years about my capabilities and achievements. More importantly, it would demonstrate that their invisible daughter possessed resources and connections that exceeded anything they had imagined possible. The transformation wouldn't be limited to their perception of my professional success. It would also challenge their understanding of leadership, influence, and the different ways people could make meaningful impacts in the world. Victoria's style of leadership involved charisma and social networking within conventional business structures. My approach relied on strategic thinking, innovation, and building systems that created value for others. Both approaches could be effective, but my family had never recognized that my quieter methods might actually produce superior. 3 weeks before Victoria's wedding, Monica provided me with a comprehensive preview of everything her team had planned for the reception. The scope of the event exceeded even my expectations. Professional photographers would document the celebration using the same equipment and techniques employed for high-profile corporate events and celebrity functions. The catering menu featured dishes that required specialized ingredients and preparation methods typically reserved for exclusive restaurants and private clubs. Even the transportation logistics reflected the kind of attention to detail that most families never encountered. Luxury vehicle service would ensure that every guest experienced the kind of treatment normally provided to visiting executives and entertainment industry clients. Valet parking would be managed by professionals who regularly worked major corporate galas and charity fundraisers. The cumulative effect would be overwhelming in its sophistication and obvious expense. My family would find themselves attending an event that surpassed anything they had previously experienced, created by the daughter they had consistently underestimated and overlooked. The contrast between their expectations and the reality of what I had orchestrated would make my capabilities impossible to ignore or minimize. But perhaps the most meaningful aspect of the project was what it represented about my own transformation. Years earlier, I had been the family member desperately seeking approval for achievements that my relatives couldn't understand or appreciate. Now I was in a position to create experiences that would leave them questioning everything they thought they understood about success, leadership, and the different ways people could build meaningful careers. The wedding reception would mark more than just the end of my invisibility within the family. It would announce the arrival of someone who had transcended their expectations so completely that the old dynamics could never be restored. Whether they eventually chose to embrace this new reality or struggled to accept it, they would never again be able to dismiss me as the family member whose achievements didn't quite measure up to conventional standards. Victoria's wedding would become the moment when everything changed, though none of them realized it yet. The morning of Victoria's wedding arrived with the kind of perfect California weather that seemed orchestrated specifically for momentous occasions. As I stood in my Santa Monica apartment, adjusting the elegant navy dress I had chosen for the reception, I felt a calm certainty about what the evening would reveal. After years of careful planning and months of intensive coordination with Monica's team, the stage was finally set for my family to discover exactly what their invisible daughter had accomplished while they weren't paying attention. The ceremony at St. Michael's Episcopal Church proceeded beautifully, with Victoria radiant in her designer gown and Bradley looking appropriately nervous as he waited at the altar. Patricia dabbed at tears of joy while Richard beamed with unmistakable paternal pride. The service was traditional and heartfelt, filled with the kind of moments that made weddings meaningful regardless of the celebration that would follow. During the ceremony, I found myself observing my family with the detached perspective of someone who understood that fundamental changes were about to occur in our relationships. They currently saw me as the helpful sister who had managed to secure a nice venue and coordinate basic reception logistics on short notice. Within a few hours, that perception would be shattered by a reality so far beyond their expectations that they would struggle to process what they were experiencing. As guests began making their way from the church to their cars for the 20-minute drive to the Century Plaza Hotel, I could hear fragments of conversations about the reception venue. Most people expected a pleasant evening in a hotel ballroom with good food and dancing, the kind of celebration that would be memorable for Victoria and Bradley but unremarkable in terms of elaborate sophistication or obvious expense. What awaited them would challenge those assumptions in ways that would leave many guests questioning everything they thought they understood about the Collins family's circumstances and capabilities. More importantly, for my purposes, it would force my parents and extended relatives to confront the fact that they had fundamentally misjudged one of their own family members. The elevator ride to the Century Plaza rooftop felt like ascending toward a revelation that had been years in the making. Patricia adjusted Victoria's dress train while Richard straightened his tie, both chatting excitedly about the reception they expected to find upstairs. Uncle Michael and Aunt Jennifer stood nearby with other relatives, all anticipating a pleasant evening of dinner and conversation in what they assumed would be a nicely decorated hotel conference room. As the elevator doors opened onto the rooftop level, the transformation hit everyone simultaneously. The wall of fragrant air that greeted us was intoxicating, rich with the scent of thousands of white roses, peonies, and exotic orchids that had been flown in from specialty growers around the world. But the floral arrangements were just the beginning of what Monica's team had created during their elaborate transformation of the space. The Century Plaza rooftop had been converted into something that looked like it belonged in a luxury lifestyle magazine or high-budget movie scene. String lights wove through temporary trellises covered in cascading greenery, while crystal chandeliers hung from structures that hadn't existed 48 hours earlier. The entire space glowed with warm golden light that made every guest appear as if they were posed for professional photographs. The silence that followed the elevator doors opening was profound. Victoria's hand flew to her mouth as she took in the garden paradise that had been created specifically for her celebration. Patricia stood frozen, her eyes moving from one spectacular detail to another as she tried to process what she was seeing. Richard's expression shifted from pleasant anticipation to complete bewilderment as he realized that this elaborate transformation was far beyond anything he had imagined possible. "Emma," Patricia whispered finally, her voice barely audible above the soft jazz music that filled the air, "what is this place? How did you manage to arrange something like this?" Before I could respond, Monica Reeves appeared at my side with the kind of professional grace that came from managing high-profile events for discerning clients. She wore an elegant black dress and carried herself with the confidence of someone accustomed to orchestrating celebrations that exceeded everyone's expectations. "Good evening, everyone," Monica said warmly, extending her hand to Patricia. "I'm Monica Reeves from Prestige Event Design. Emma has been wonderful to work with on creating this celebration for Victoria. We're so pleased you're all here to enjoy what we've put together." Patricia shook Monica's hand automatically while continuing to stare at the transformed rooftop space. "Prestige Event Design," she repeated slowly, as if trying to place the name in some context that would make sense of what she was experiencing. "I've never heard of your company." Monica's smile remained perfectly professional. "We specialize in corporate galas and private celebrations for clients who require a higher level of customization and attention to detail. Emma contacted us through one of her business connections, and we were delighted to create something special for Victoria's wedding." The phrase business connections hung in the air with implications that my family was only beginning to process. Uncle Michael stepped forward, his usual jovial demeanor replaced by obvious confusion about how his quiet niece had gained access to event planning services that created results like this. "Emma," he said carefully, "this is incredible, but it must have cost a fortune. How were you able to afford something so elaborate?" The question I had been anticipating for months had finally been asked directly. Every conversation with my family over the years had been colored by their assumptions about my limited earning potential and modest professional achievements. They had consistently treated my technology work as a pleasant hobby that generated enough income for a simple lifestyle but nothing approaching real financial success. Standing in the middle of the garden paradise Monica had created, surrounded by evidence of resources and connections that contradicted everything they believed about my circumstances, circumstances, I realized that the moment for subtle revelations had passed. My family deserved a direct answer to Uncle Michael's question, even if that answer would fundamentally alter our relationships. The reception cost about as much as a luxury car, I said quietly, allowing the implications to settle. Which isn't a problem because TechFlow Innovations generates enough revenue to make this kind of celebration easily affordable. The silence that followed my statement was even more profound than their initial reaction to seeing the transformed rooftop. Patricia's eyes widened as she processed what I had just revealed about my company's financial success. Richard's expression shifted from confusion to something approaching shock as he began to understand that his assumptions about my career had been completely incorrect. TechFlow generates how much revenue? Victoria asked, her voice barely above a whisper. About $85 million annually, I replied, watching their faces as they tried to reconcile this information with their long-standing perception of my professional achievements. We employ just over 300 people and provide logistics software to major corporations across North America. David Kim appeared beside me at that moment, having arrived with several other TechFlow employees who had been invited to celebrate Victoria's wedding. His presence added another layer of validation to what I was revealing about my business success, particularly when Monica greeted him with the kind of professional familiarity that indicated ongoing business relationships. David, Monica said warmly, I'm so glad you could make it. Emma mentioned that several of your team members would be joining us tonight. Patricia turned to David with the expression of someone desperately seeking clarity about information that challenged everything she thought she understood. You work for Emma? She asked tentatively. David's smile was genuinely warm as he extended his hand to my mother. I'm David Kim, Chief Technology Officer and co-founder of TechFlow Innovations. Emma and I built the company together over the past 5 years. She's one of the most talented business strategists I've ever had the privilege of working with. The validation from David carried weight that my own statements couldn't provide. Here was an obviously successful professional who treated me as an equal partner rather than a subordinate employee. His description of our working relationship contradicted my family's assumption that my computer work was something like freelance web design or minor technical consulting. As more guests arrived and began experiencing the elaborate celebration Monica had orchestrated, the contrast between the event's sophistication and my family's expectations became increasingly obvious. The jazz ensemble that provided background music was the same group that regularly performed at exclusive corporate galas and entertainment industry events. The catering staff served hors d'oeuvres that required specialized ingredients and preparation techniques typically found only in the most expensive restaurants. Every detail of the reception demonstrated access to resources and vendor relationships that extended far beyond typical wedding planning. The professional photographers documenting the celebration used equipment and techniques employed for high-profile business events and celebrity functions. Even the luxury transportation service that had brought many guests from the church operated at a level of sophistication that most families never encountered. Aunt Jennifer approached me during the cocktail hour, her usual confident demeanor replaced by obvious uncertainty about how to process what she was experiencing. Emma dear, she said carefully, I'm having trouble understanding how you were able to arrange all of this. The flowers alone must have cost thousands of dollars. The flowers cost about $15,000, I replied matter-of-factly, but Monica has connections with specialty growers who can source rare blooms on short notice. When you're planning corporate events for Fortune 500 companies, you develop relationships with vendors who can create results like this. Jennifer's eyes widened at the casual mention of spending $15,000 on floral arrangements. Fortune 500 companies, she repeated slowly. Emma, are you saying that your computer business works with major corporations? The question provided another opportunity to clarify exactly what TechFlow represented in terms of market impact and business significance. Our logistics software processes supply chain operations for about 40% of the Fortune 1000, I explained. We handle everything from inventory management to distribution optimization for companies that ship products worldwide. As the evening progressed, my family's gradual understanding of my actual professional achievements created a fascinating dynamic. They found themselves celebrating Victoria's wedding while simultaneously discovering that the family member they had consistently overlooked had built something far more substantial than anything they had previously understood or acknowledged. The revelation wasn't limited to financial success or business connections. The reception itself demonstrated capabilities they had never associated with my personality or leadership style. Every aspect of the celebration had been planned and coordinated with precision that exceeded their expectations, orchestrated by someone they had dismissed as lacking the social skills necessary for meaningful professional achievement. Richard pulled me aside during dinner, his expression reflecting the kind of serious consideration he usually reserved for important business discussions. "Emma," he said quietly, "I think I owe you an apology. We clearly didn't understand what you had accomplished with your company." The acknowledgement was meaningful, particularly coming from my father, who had consistently treated Victoria's conventional career path as the gold standard for professional success. But even more significant was the recognition that their misjudgment hadn't been limited to misunderstanding my financial circumstances. They had failed to appreciate my capabilities as a strategic thinker and effective leader. "I spent years trying to explain what TechFlow was becoming," I said gently, "but I realized that some things are easier to demonstrate than describe." Patricia joined our conversation, her eyes still moving around the transformed rooftop space as if she couldn't quite believe what her daughter had orchestrated. "Emma, sweetheart, why didn't you tell us about your success? We had no idea you had built something so impressive." The question touched on years of frustration about being dismissed and overlooked within my own family. "I tried to share my achievements," I said honestly, "but every conversation about my work was met with polite disinterest or suggestions that I should find something more stable like Victoria's job." The truth of that statement was evident in my parents' expressions. They could remember countless family gatherings where my updates about TechFlow's progress had been brushed aside while Victoria's much smaller professional milestones received enthusiastic celebration and detailed discussion. As the reception continued into the evening, I watched my family interact with the elaborate celebration I had created while processing this new understanding of my capabilities and achievements. Victoria moved through the party with obvious delight, finally experiencing the kind of spectacular wedding reception she had always dreamed about. But even she seemed somewhat overwhelmed by the realization that her quiet sister had possessed the resources and connections necessary to create something this extraordinary. The most satisfying moment came during the formal toasts when Richard stood to address the assembled guests. His usual confident speaking style was tempered by a humility I had never heard from him before. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "Victoria and Bradley's wedding has been made possible through the generosity and exceptional capabilities of someone who has taught our family an important lesson about not underestimating the people closest to us." He paused, looking directly at me. "Emma, we're grateful not only for this incredible celebration but for showing us what we should have recognized years ago about your remarkable achievements." The applause that followed felt different from the polite acknowledgement I had received at family gatherings throughout my life. This was genuine recognition for substantial accomplishments from people who finally understood what they had been overlooking. Later that evening, as guests began to leave and Monica's team efficiently managed the event wrap-up, Victoria approached me with tears in her eyes. "Emma," she said, embracing me with an intensity that reflected her emotional overwhelm, "I don't know how to thank you for creating something so perfect. But more than that, I'm sorry we never understood what you had built with your company." The apology meant more than the elaborate reception or the family's newfound recognition of my professional success. It represented acknowledgement that their treatment of me had been based on assumptions rather than genuine interest in my actual achievements and capabilities. As I stood on the rooftop later that night, watching the cleanup crew dismantle the temporary structures and remove the thousands of flowers that had created our garden paradise, I reflected on what had changed during those few hours. My family would never again be able to dismiss me as the daughter whose achievements didn't quite measure up to conventional standards. They had experienced firsthand what someone with real resources and business acumen could accomplish when properly motivated. But perhaps most importantly, I had demonstrated to myself that the years of feeling invisible and undervalued had actually been productive. While my family wasn't paying attention, I had grown into someone capable of creating experiences that exceeded everyone's expectations and solving problems that others couldn't imagine addressing. The wedding reception had marked the end of my invisibility, but not through anger or resentment. Instead, it had been a celebration of what became possible when someone stopped seeking approval from people who couldn't recognize their value and started building something meaningful on their own terms. Victoria's wedding would be remembered by everyone who attended as one of the most spectacular celebrations they had ever experienced. But for me, it represented something even more significant, the moment when I finally became impossible for my family to overlook or underestimate. The invisible daughter had revealed herself to be the most successful member of the family, and our relationships would never be the same again. The weeks following Victoria's wedding brought a series of conversations and interactions that would have been unimaginable just a month earlier. My phone buzzed constantly with calls from family members who suddenly wanted to understand everything about TechFlow innovations, my business partnerships, and the journey that had led to building such a successful company. The same relatives who had spent years politely nodding when I mentioned my work were now asking detailed questions about software development, client relationships, and expansion strategies. Patricia called me 3 days after the reception, her voice carrying a mixture of pride and bewilderment that perfectly captured how dramatically her perception of me had shifted. "Emma, honey, I keep thinking about Saturday night and how incredible everything was. But I'm also realizing how much we missed about what you were accomplishing all these years." The conversation that followed lasted nearly 2 hours as my mother attempted to process not just the scale of my professional success, but the implications of how completely our family had misjudged one of its own members. She asked about everything from how I had learned to code to how TechFlow had grown from a startup to a major player in enterprise software. More importantly, she began to understand that my quiet demeanor and preference for working independently hadn't been signs of limited ambition, but rather a different approach to achieving extraordinary results. I keep remembering all those family dinners where we talked about Victoria's latest promotion or campaign success, Patricia said with obvious regret in her voice. Meanwhile, you were building something that made her entire company look small by comparison, and we were treating it like a hobby. The acknowledgement was more meaningful than any elaborate apology could have been. It demonstrated that my family was genuinely grappling with how their assumptions and biases had prevented them from recognizing achievements that were happening right in front of them. More significantly, it suggested they were beginning to understand that success could manifest in ways they hadn't previously considered or valued. Richard's response to the wedding revelation was characteristically practical but equally dramatic in its implications. He scheduled a lunch meeting at his office, approaching our conversation with the kind of serious preparation he normally reserved for important business negotiations. When I arrived at Collins Hardware and Garden Center, I found him waiting with a stack of printed articles about TechFlow that he had obviously spent considerable time researching. "Emma," he said without preamble, "I've been reading about your company and I need to understand something. According to these business journals, TechFlow Innovations is being mentioned alongside some of the most successful technology companies in California. Is that accurate?" The directness of his question reflected how completely the wedding reception had shattered his preconceptions about my professional trajectory. For years, Richard had viewed my career through the lens of his own experience running a small family business with local customers and straightforward operational challenges. The idea that his daughter had built something that operated on a national scale with Fortune 500 clients had required him to fundamentally reconsider what he thought he understood about business success. I spent the next hour walking him through TechFlow's development, from the initial concept through our current market position and future growth plans. Richard listened with the focused attention he had never previously given to my professional updates, asking informed questions that demonstrated genuine interest in understanding rather than polite obligation to appear supportive. "What strikes me most," he said finally, "is that you accomplished all of this without any help or guidance from family. We should have been supporting your efforts instead of dismissing them." The admission was particularly meaningful coming from Richard, who had always prided himself on being a mentor figure for his daughter's career development. His recognition that he had failed to provide that guidance for my most significant professional achievements represented a fundamental shift in how he viewed both my capabilities and his own parental effectiveness. But perhaps the most complex response came from Victoria herself. The day after her honeymoon, she called requesting a private conversation that couldn't wait for our next family gathering. We met at a quiet restaurant in Santa Monica, far enough from Riverside to ensure privacy for what she clearly anticipated would be a difficult discussion. "Emma," she began hesitantly, "I need to talk about what happened at my wedding, but I'm not sure how to start." Victoria's discomfort was understandable. For our entire lives, she had been the family member whose achievements were celebrated and discussed, while my accomplishments remained largely invisible to our relatives. The wedding reception had not only revealed the scale of my success, but had done so in a way that made comparison inevitable. The celebration I had orchestrated for her special day was more elaborate and sophisticated than anything she could have arranged through her own professional connections or financial resources. "The reception was incredible," she continued, "and I'm grateful beyond words for what you created. But I'm also struggling with the realization that I've been completely wrong about what you've accomplished with your career." Victoria's honesty about her mixed emotions was refreshing in a way that surprised me. Rather than simply expressing gratitude for the wedding celebration, she was acknowledging the deeper implications of what my capabilities demonstration had revealed about our family dynamics and her own assumptions about relative success. "For years, I thought I was the daughter who had figured out how to succeed in the business world," she said quietly. "I was proud of my marketing career and felt like I was setting a good example for ambitious professional women. But your company generates more revenue in a month than Morrison Marketing handles in an entire year." The comparison was accurate but also missed the point I most wanted her to understand. TechFlow's financial success wasn't what mattered most about the wedding reception or the broader revelation about my achievements. What mattered was the demonstration that different approaches to career development could produce meaningful results, and that my family's inability to recognize or value my methods had caused them to miss something significant. "Victoria," I said gently, "this isn't about comparing our careers or measuring whose achievements are more impressive. It's about recognition that success doesn't always look like what people expect, and that dismissing someone's work because it doesn't fit familiar patterns can mean missing something important." Our conversation continued for several hours as Victoria processed not just the practical implications of my professional success, but the emotional impact of realizing how completely she had misunderstood her own sister's capabilities and achievements. By the end of our lunch, we had established a new foundation for our relationship based on mutual respect, rather than the previous dynamic where she was the celebrated achiever and I was the supportive but unremarkable sibling. The transformation in extended family relationships was equally dramatic but developed more gradually over the following months. Uncle Michael, who had spent years treating me like a child whose computer hobby was vaguely amusing, began asking serious questions about technology trends and business strategy. His accounting firm was struggling to adapt to digital client management systems, and he eventually approached me for consulting advice that led to a comprehensive modernization of his operations. Aunt Jennifer's response was more personal but equally revealing of how the wedding revelation had changed family perceptions. She confessed during a holiday gathering that she had always worried I was falling behind compared to Victoria's conventional career progress. The discovery that I had actually built something far more substantial than anyone had realized forced her to confront her own biases about what professional success looked like for young women. I kept thinking you needed to find a nice stable job with benefits and a clear advancement path, she admitted with obvious embarrassment. Meanwhile, you had already created your own company that provides benefits and advancement opportunities for hundreds of other people. These individual conversations and relationship adjustments were meaningful, but the most significant change was in how family gatherings functioned after Victoria's wedding. The dynamic where Victoria's achievements dominated discussion while my professional updates were met with polite disinterest had been permanently altered. Now family members actively sought my perspective on business trends, asked detailed questions about TechFlow's operations, and treated my strategic insights with the respect they had always shown Victoria's marketing expertise. The shift wasn't always comfortable for everyone involved. Some relatives struggled to reconcile their new understanding of my success with years of established family hierarchies and assumptions. Others seemed almost intimidated by the realization that they had been interacting with someone whose professional accomplishments far exceeded their own without recognizing it. But for me, the most meaningful aspect of this transformation wasn't the newfound respect or recognition, though those were certainly gratifying after years of feeling invisible. What mattered most was the sense of authenticity that came from no longer having to hide or minimize my achievements to avoid making family interactions awkward. 6 months after Victoria's wedding, TechFlow Innovations was acquired by Microsoft for $280 million. The news made technology industry headlines and was covered by major business publications as one of the most significant software acquisitions of the year. When the announcement appeared in the Los Angeles Times business section, Richard called within an hour of the story being published online. "Emma," he said, his voice carrying a mix of excitement and stunned disbelief, "I'm looking at an article that says Microsoft just bought your company for nearly $300 million. Is this accurate?" The acquisition had been in negotiation for months, but I had chosen not to discuss it with family members until the deal was finalized. After years of having my professional achievements dismissed or misunderstood, I had developed a preference for sharing major developments only after they were completed rather than during uncertain planning phases. The final purchase price was $280 million, I confirmed. "David and I will continue running TechFlow as a Microsoft subsidiary, but with access to resources and distribution channels that will help us expand internationally." The silence that followed my confirmation lasted long enough that I wondered if the phone connection had been lost. When Richard finally responded, his voice carried an emotional weight I had never heard from him before. "Emma, I need you to understand something. Your mother and I are incredibly proud of what you've accomplished, but we're also ashamed that we didn't recognize or support your achievements when they were developing. We failed as parents in ways that we're only now beginning to understand." The apology was more comprehensive and heartfelt than anything I had expected to receive. It acknowledged not just the practical oversight of missing my professional success, but the deeper failure to provide emotional support and recognition during the years when I was building something meaningful without family encouragement or understanding. Over the following days, news of the Microsoft acquisition spread through our extended family and social networks in ways that created additional opportunities for relationship repair and renewed connection. Cousins who had lost touch began reaching out to reconnect. Family friends who had dismissed me as the quiet Collins daughter started asking Patricia and Richard for introductions so they could discuss business opportunities or seek strategic advice. The attention was gratifying but also somewhat overwhelming after years of being largely ignored during social gatherings. More importantly, it highlighted how dramatically external validation could change people's perception of someone they thought they already understood completely. Victoria's response to the acquisition news was particularly telling. She called the same evening the announcement appeared in business publications, her voice carrying genuine excitement that seemed uncompromised by the complex emotions she had expressed earlier about our relative professional achievements. "Emma, this is incredible. I just read the Microsoft article and I can't believe my sister is going to be running a subsidiary of one of the world's largest technology companies." Her enthusiasm felt authentic in a way that suggested she had successfully processed the earlier revelations about my success and found a way to celebrate my achievements without feeling diminished by them. This represented significant personal growth for someone who had spent most of her life being the family member whose accomplishments generated the most attention and recognition. As I reflected on the year that had transformed my relationship with my family, I realized that the most valuable outcome wasn't the recognition or respect I had finally received for my professional achievements. Instead, it was the discovery that authenticity in family relationships was possible even after years of misunderstanding and mutual disappointment. The invisible daughter, who had felt overlooked and undervalued, had become someone whose success was impossible to ignore or minimize. But more importantly, I had learned that building something meaningful on your own terms was more satisfying than earning approval from people who couldn't recognize your value until external circumstances forced them to pay attention. The Microsoft acquisition would provide resources for expanding TechFlow's international operations and developing new product lines that could benefit businesses worldwide. But the personal victory was simpler and more profound. I had become visible to the people who mattered most, not through desperate attempts to earn their attention, but by quietly building something so substantial that my achievements could no longer be overlooked. The family dynamics that had once made me feel like an outsider in my own home had been permanently altered. The relatives who had spent years celebrating Victoria's conventional success while dismissing my technological innovation now understood that both paths could lead to meaningful achievement and that their inability to recognize alternative forms of success had caused them to miss something extraordinary. Victoria's wedding had been the catalyst for this transformation, but the real change had been years in the making. Every late night spent coding, every strategic decision about TechFlow's development, every moment of building something valuable while feeling invisible to my family had contributed to creating circumstances where the truth about my capabilities could no longer be hidden or minimized. The invisible daughter had revealed herself to be the most successful member of the family, but more importantly, she had demonstrated that success doesn't always announce itself in ways that traditional families expect or immediately understand. Sometimes the most significant achievements happen quietly, developed by people who prefer strategic thinking to social networking and long-term value creation to short-term recognition. My family would never overlook me again, not because I had demanded their attention, but because I had built something too substantial to ignore. 2 years had passed since Victoria's wedding and 18 months since the Microsoft acquisition when I found myself standing in the exact same spot where this entire journey had begun. The Grand Ballroom at Riverside Country Club looked almost identical to that evening when I had been introduced as Emma, the computer girl, to a room full of relatives who barely acknowledged my presence, but tonight, everything was different. The occasion was my parents' 40th wedding anniversary celebration, an event that Patricia and Richard had initially planned as a modest dinner with close family and friends. When they mentioned their anniversary plans during a casual phone conversation, I had made a suggestion that would have been unthinkable just a few years earlier. What if I helped coordinate something more elaborate to honor their decades together and celebrate everything they had built as a family? This time, there was no polite dismissal of my offer or gentle suggestions that event planning was beyond my capabilities. Instead, Patricia had immediately accepted my assistance with the kind of enthusiasm she once reserved exclusively for Victoria's achievements. The transformation in my family's perception of my abilities had become so complete that they now actively sought my input on important decisions and treated my strategic thinking as a valuable family resource. The anniversary celebration I orchestrated was different from Victoria's wedding in several important ways. Where the wedding had been designed to demonstrate capabilities my family hadn't recognized, this event was created from a foundation of mutual respect and genuine appreciation for what I could contribute. There was no need for elaborate surprises or dramatic revelations because my family already understood what I had accomplished and valued my unique approach to solving complex challenges. Standing in the beautifully decorated ballroom, watching my parents greet guests who had gathered to celebrate their marriage and family legacy, I reflected on how completely our relationships had evolved. Uncle Michael approached me early in the evening, not with the patronizing tone he had once used when asking about my computer hobby, but with genuine respect for my expertise and accomplishments. "Emma," he said warmly, "I wanted to thank you again for the consulting work you did for my accounting firm. The system upgrades you recommended have improved our efficiency so dramatically that we're considering expanding to serve clients in neighboring counties." The conversation that followed was substantive and professional, focusing on business strategy and technology implementation rather than polite small talk about family news. Michael's firm had indeed expanded after implementing the digital management systems I had recommended, and he credited much of their recent success to the operational improvements we had discussed during our consulting sessions. More significantly, Michael's transformation represented something broader that had occurred throughout my extended family network. Relatives who had once viewed me as the family member whose achievements were difficult to understand or celebrate had become genuinely interested in my perspective on business trends, strategic planning, and professional development. My insights were now valued rather than dismissed, and my expertise was actively sought rather than politely tolerated. Aunt Jennifer found me during the cocktail hour, carrying herself with the confidence that came from her own recent professional success. Following our conversations about career development and strategic thinking, she had launched a boutique consulting practice that helped small businesses implement digital marketing strategies. Her venture was thriving, and she had frequently mentioned that our discussions about entrepreneurship and business development had inspired her to pursue opportunities she had never previously considered. "I keep meaning to tell you," Jennifer said with obvious excitement, "that the marketing framework we discussed has helped 3 of my clients increase their online engagement by more than 50%. You have a gift for seeing solutions that other people miss." The compliment was meaningful not just because it acknowledged my strategic capabilities, but because it came from someone who had spent years questioning whether I possessed the practical business skills necessary for meaningful professional achievement. Jennifer's success with her own consulting practice had given her first-hand experience with the kind of strategic thinking I had tried to explain during countless family gatherings when my expertise was met with polite disinterest. As the evening progressed, I found myself observing family interactions with a perspective that would have been impossible during Victoria's engagement party. The relatives who had once struggled to find conversation topics when speaking with me now actively sought my opinions on everything from investment strategies to career advice for their own children. The transformation was particularly evident when several cousins approached me separately throughout the night, asking for guidance about technology startups and business development opportunities they were considering. The most meaningful moment came during the formal toasts when Richard stood to address the assembled guests. His speech began with traditional reflections on 40 years of marriage and the family legacy he and Patricia had built together. But midway through his remarks, he shifted focus to acknowledge something that would have been unimaginable just a few years earlier. "Patricia and I are especially proud of our daughters and the different paths they've chosen to build meaningful careers," Richard said, his voice carrying genuine warmth as he looked toward where Victoria and I were seated. "Victoria has achieved tremendous success in marketing and continues to inspire us with her dedication to her clients and creative problem solving. Emma has built something we didn't initially understand but now recognize as truly extraordinary, creating a technology company that impacts businesses around the world while demonstrating that innovation and quiet determination can produce remarkable results." The acknowledgement was comprehensive and heartfelt, recognizing both Victoria's conventional achievements and my less traditional path to success without suggesting that one approach was superior to the other. More importantly, it demonstrated that my parents had learned to appreciate different forms of professional accomplishment rather than favoring only the career trajectories they immediately understood. Victoria's response to her father's toast was equally telling. She raised her glass toward me with obvious pride, her expression reflecting genuine admiration rather than the complex emotions she had struggled with immediately after learning about TechFlow's success. Our relationship had evolved into something more balanced and mutually respectful, with each of us appreciating the other's achievements without feeling diminished by comparison. Later that evening, as guests began to leave and I supervised the cleanup coordination with the venue staff, Patricia approached me with an expression of profound gratitude that went far beyond appreciation for event planning assistance. "Emma," she said quietly, "I want you to know that tonight has been perfect, but more importantly, I'm grateful for how patient you were with us while we learned to see you clearly." Her comment captured something essential about the journey our family had taken together. The transformation hadn't been immediate or easy, requiring all of us to confront assumptions and biases that had shaped our interactions for years. But the result was relationships based on authentic understanding rather than comfortable misconceptions. As I drove home to Santa Monica that night, I realized that the invisible daughter who had once felt overlooked and undervalued had achieved something more meaningful than professional success or family recognition. I had demonstrated that authenticity and persistence could eventually overcome even the most entrenched misunderstandings, and that building something valuable on your own terms was ultimately more satisfying than seeking approval from people who couldn't initially recognize your worth. The journey from invisibility to recognition had taught me that success doesn't always announce itself in ways that traditional families expect to see. Sometimes the most significant achievements develop quietly, created by people who prefer strategic thinking to social networking and long-term value creation to immediate validation. But eventually substance becomes impossible to overlook, and authenticity creates the foundation for relationships that celebrate rather than diminish individual accomplishments. My family would never again treat me as invisible, not because I had demanded their attention, but because I had built something too meaningful to ignore, while demonstrating that different approaches to success could produce equally valuable results. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up, just click and check them out.